Hey pilots, DrainMan here, and today I have a very special video. Today we are going to take an open source frame by TBS, and it's called the Source One, and it's a plain drain kind of frame, and we're going to take it and we are going to pimp it out. Okay, pilots, let's dive right in. I'm going to go ahead and slice everything open. We are working with the Source One freestyle frame. It is by TBS. We've also got the Mamba stack. It's got the flight controller and the ESC all in one. And to spice it up and pimp it out a little bit, we've got the flashbangs, the LED flashbangs. And what makes those so awesome is the way that they work with this flight controller. And I'm going to show you guys in this video. Right now, I went ahead and got my standoffs in. I'm working on my placement for my ESCs. It's very important to know the total amount of your stack height before you put in your stack screws. Because if your stack screws or bolts are too long, then you've got a bunch of extra bolt hanging over. If they're not long enough, then you're cramming everything and crushing everything, and you don't have that movement you need. Another thing I like about this flight controller is these grommets are absolutely phenomenal the way that they go in. I can't say that they haven't done a great job with that. It's going to have plenty of movement space to give me the vibration dampening that I need for my gyro. For the motors, we are going to be rocking the TBS Ethix moon boots, and they are by Konasty himself. These are actually the V2s. They are a 6S motor, a 2407 1739 kV. I absolutely love these motors. One of the first things I like to do is get my motors mounted, and then I can work off of that. When you're mounting your motors, you want to go ahead and use Loctite. I find it very important to use Loctite. Me, I don't build a freestyle quad without Rotor Riot skids or any type of skids for that matter. And if you know me and you've watched any one of my build videos, you know there's going to be some skids in there. I've got this little kit here. It's got all different size screws in it because we all know they're going to send us like 3mm screws with the motors, and the frames are 5mm, and they never ever work. And it just, why? Why do you send those to us? So I ordered this little kit. I think it was off of Amazon or whatever it was, and I used that to have different screw sizes to make it work. And this part can be very important because if your screw size is too short, you're not going to grab enough of the motor, and if it's too long, the tip of your screw will actually touch your motor windings. Make sure you're keeping an eye for that, and we'll check it too. After we mount the motor, we'll be sure that they're not too long. So what I do is I take a little Ziploc baggie, I put myself some Loctite on there. I see some guys, they like open it and then dab a little bit for each screw. I don't really like doing that. I'd rather, pour me a little pile, I dip and go. I mean, you see this. Look how quick I've got this one motor on. And when you're tightening them up, make sure you're doing a caddy corner deal. That's how I like to do it. I also will set a couple of the screws first with no Loctite just to make sure I'm aligned the way that I should be. And then I come back around and crank them all down, make sure they're nice and snug. We don't want to strip it, but we definitely do not want it loose. Because of all the vibrations, this is one of the most busiest parts on your quadcopter, so it's important that your motors are on tight. And if they're not on tight, that's going to make for a noisy drone. So as you can see here, I've made sure that my screws aren't touching my motor windings, and everything looks good. I also slap on my prop nut now because the last thing I want to do is misplace it, and I've got a bad habit of that. So we'll get that taken care of by just setting them on now, and then you don't have to worry about losing it. All right, so there was no point to show you all four, so I went ahead and showed you one, and I put the rest on. Here we go. All four motors on. Looking good. Okay, so I want to take a minute to talk to you guys about the LEDs. This flight controller has a really cool feature. Well, it actually has multiple really cool features like the Bluetooth and etc. I'm not really going to get into all of it. But for the LEDs, what I wanted to talk to you about is how cool it is that they've actually set up a button. So whenever you want to do LEDs, you've got to put them on, and you've got to have a signal, and then you've got to do tons of work in beta flight. With this flight controller right here, it is absolutely amazing. If you use their LEDs, which are the flashbangs, and you run them with their flight controller, it's as simple as pressing a button. So we're going to go ahead and wire them up now, and then I'll show them to you guys. And you've got 3 wires that matter. You've got an in, a ground, and then you've got your voltage. And these are wanting and looking for 5 volts. Fortunately, because I'm running them with this flight controller, there is a designated pad for the LEDs. And it's basically the signal wire, except it goes to the button instead of actually going to beta flight, which makes it so super awesome and very, very simple, because you just press a button to change colors, and then you long press to get different patterns and designs and all kinds of cool stuff. So as you can see here, I'm giving it a quick scrub with the alcohol, and then this LED or this flashbang is actually acting as race wire as well. So it's a kind of a 2-for-1. So it's pretty sweet. And then I twist my wires up to keep them nice and neat, and then we're ready for install. Now, how I installed this is I just stuck the wires right through these little holes that came on the Source 1. I'm going to have to go ahead and just say I lucked out on that one instead of having to like loop wires around and do this silly nonsense. Also, you have the option to use it as a race wire like I stated before. I've decided not to go that route. I just went ahead and stuck them to the bottom and used these little 4 holes here. And it turns out pretty sweet. Now, to make them stick well and stay good and not come off during flight or crash, I'm going to put a little bit of double-sided sticky tape on the bottom, and then I'm going to stick it to the frame. And then what I'm also going to do is I'm going to put a zip tie around it. You'll notice that I've cut my double-sided sticky tape to size, and the reason why is if you have extra hanging over, dirt and grass and all kinds of other stuff gets all caught up in there, and we ain't looking for that. And this is what we look like with all 4 done, ready to go. I'm going to give them one last little pass over with the heat gun, make sure everything's tight, make sure my sticky is sticking. And as you can see, I mean, it looks really good. I think that it came out very well. I lucked out with these holes on the Source 1. So if you're interested in running LEDs on the bottom, this is the frame for it. And I think this frame is running, I don't know, like 26 bucks or something. It's an absolute no-brainer, absolute win. Now, because I decided to go without putting the LEDs on the top and using it as race wire, I needed something to do with my motor wires. And instead of just zip tying them down, I decided to give them a quick little braid. I thought that it would look cool and also to keep them out of the way of the prop. So it's kind of a 2-for again, where I'm getting 2 for 1. So now that my motor wires are taken care of, I'm going to zip tie them down, and I'm going to do it at the same time that I do my LEDs. That way everything's being held down at one time, nice and neat. And by doing this now, I'm pulling all of my wires that need to be soldered. I'm pulling them over towards the flight controller and towards the ESC. And then I can go ahead and solder everything up all in one shot. It makes for a clean build, and it makes for an easy work with environment. So after I get all my zip ties on, the next thing I'm going to do is work on my XT60. And what I need to do with that is I need to tin the actual XT60, and I need to tin the wires that are going to be going to that and going to my ESC. And I like to get this done now. Also, it's important that you're facing in the correct orientation, because if you're not going to go into beta flight and remap your motors, you want to keep mind of that your 1 is where 1 is, 2 is where 2 is, so on and so forth. So now that I'm pre-tinned, I'll go ahead and actually solder the wires to the XT60 itself. Once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and put a little heat shrink on them. Some pilots like to put their capacitors there, and you can if you want. I like less bulky out on the outside. I'd rather find a way to put it on the inside. So as you can see here, I found about where I'll be plugging in, and then I laid my wires over, I made a mark, and then that's where I cut. Now I'm going to tin them up, and then I'm going to go ahead and solder them up to the ESC. Whenever you're working with your power wire, your XT60 wire, you got a lot of solder flowing, and you want it flowing smooth and healthy. You don't want to be sitting there holding it down, frying everything, getting everything way too hot. That's why it's always best to turn your iron up pretty high. I go to about 450 on this one, and that way when I touch, it melts, and as you can see, I get a nice, clean, healthy bubble. After my power leads are soldered up, I add an extra big bubble of solder right on top, a fresh one. That way I can sink my capacitor in without any trouble. And also I want it to be held on strong. This is not something you want getting ripped off easily. Okay, so for a quick recap, we've got on our XT60, which is our power lead. We've got on our capacitor. We've installed our motors. We've braided the wires. We've soldered up the wires to the ESC. We went ahead and zip tied everything down. We put double-sided sticky tape where needed. The only thing left hanging off at this moment is the actual wire connections for our LEDs. And the only reason why is because those are going to solder up to the flight controller. So with all that being said, it is time to mount our flight controller. I went ahead and set it in just for now. Everything is looking good. XT60 is going to be about here when I plug in. Everything is right on par. Next up is our VTX. For this, I've decided to go with the TBS Unify Pro 32 HV. And it's an MMCX Unify Pro, which I absolutely love Unify Pro. They're just, for me, I've been using them so long, they just make life easy. So we're going to slice this open and we're going to get it out of the package. It has a double-decker design and 1,000 milliwatt output power. It's got pit mode and OSD and all kinds of awesome stuff. There's something else too. You've got an option to run smart audio 2 different ways. So you can run it the traditional way or you can run it with the Lewis grips. And then the other option is you take the green and white wire and you connect them to your Crossfire, and then you just go ahead and let the Crossfire handle the rest. I'm going to do it that way on this build because, hey, why not? I mount the Unify at the top plate, so we'll deal with that in a minute. Let's go ahead and get our Crossfire situated, unless you're running a different receiver like an FR Sky or an RXSR, whatever. I have this cool little vise here. It was actually 3D printed. I love this thing. I use it a lot. You've got to do a lot of twisty twists to get it to grab, but once it does, it's really got a nice hold, and it's cheap and 3D printed, so I don't have to worry about burning it or messing it up. Now, for the Crossfire, I have a video on how to set this thing up from start to finish, from pulling it out of the package to setting it up, wiring it, installing it, the works. So I'm going to link that video down in the video description, and I'm not going to get into the Crossfire. Now, I know everybody was waiting on this part, and that's the LEDs. Let's go ahead and dive right in. So on the flight controller, you've got 3 little pads, and they're for your 3 wires that are coming off of your LEDs. You're going to go ahead and tin your wires. Sometimes, when I strip them, they're a little bit long. I'll go ahead and tin them first so I don't have stray wires everywhere, and then I trim them after the fact. Then you grab your tweezers and you solder them up. What's really cool about the Mamba board is it comes with a false board, or a mounting board, I should say, that is actually your entire pinout. And I use that to know where each wire goes. And after you do the first 1 or 2, you kind of start to learn the pattern. And what that is they've got 5 volt on the outside, then your ground, and then your LED signal is the very last wire, or the most inside wire. I'm not going to show you soldering all 4 because that would be extremely repetitive. So this is how you do 1, in case you've got this exact same board. And then for the next step, we're going to go ahead and see how they work. So let's go ahead and fire them up. I'm, of course, using a smoke stopper. And I mean, look at this. Wow. And if I press the button, I can change the pattern. I can change the color. Look, green. I've got red. This thing right here is truly phenomenal. I'm absolutely in love with it. I think that this is the next best thing since sliced bread when you're talking about LEDs, because if anybody's tried to set up LEDs on Betaflight, I mean, it can be done and it's not that difficult, but it is a pain in the neck, and this is how LEDs should be. And also, if you get into CLR racing LEDs, those are great and they're race wire and you really can't control them, and you can't just have your quad how I have it now with the LEDs on and kicking without having, power running through the motor wires. So this is also, they double as race wire, these LEDs here. But when you turn your motors on, they don't affect the LEDs at all. The LEDs are controlled by the signal and the 5 volts. Okay, so next up on our curriculum is going to be our smart audio wires for our Crossfire. And they come directly from the TBS Unify. If you've got a Unify like this one, you can do this. And it's extremely helpful, and it just makes everything it just works together, and life is just so much easier this way. So make sure you follow the same pattern I did, with green where I got it and white where I got it. Go ahead and get your antenna connected, and then what we'll do is we'll de-pin the wires that we're not using. So with these high voltage Unifies, you get the option to power a camera right from it. And it's actually got extra filtering in it and everything, just in case you do decide to do that. I am not planning to do that, so I don't need those wires. So I'm going to go ahead and D-pin those wires. Now that I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and start getting my camera ready. I've got a full-size camera. I'm rocking the Foxeer Falcor. I do have it in white. I've got the 1.8 millimeter lens, and I absolutely love it. I got a beautiful clear view, beautiful picture, no fishbowl going on, and I love it. And I'm noticing something here while putting the Source 1 frame together and putting on the camera, that you've actually got 3 holes lined up. And you can adjust your camera angle just like any other, frame. But on this one, I'm actually able to lock it down with 3 screws. I really, really like that because I hate jello and I don't like having my camera bouncing all around. So I like the fact that I can lock down 3 screws each side, and I know my camera won't go anywhere. I can crash, I can bump into stuff, and I don't have to worry about my camera every time. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prep my actual camera plug now that I'm connecting my camera. So on my camera, I've got an extra wire here for VSIN, which is actually your voltage sensor, and because of my Betaflight OSD, I don't need it. So I'm going to D-pin that, and then I'm also going to D-pin this other wire here, which is this white wire, and that wire is for my camera control, which I won't need. I just set all my settings and I run it, so I don't need that. And as always, I give my wires a little loop-de-loop spin, and then I tin up my pads. What you got to do is you got to have your pin out, and we only need 3 for this camera in this situation. And that's our 5 volt, our ground, and then our video wire. A lot of flight controllers have it labeled. You'll actually have the pad, and then it'll say what it is right next to it. This one doesn't have that, but just as good. They went ahead and gave you that mounting board that I was telling you about, and you'll see it here when I go ahead and install it because I'm going to use it to mount my VTX. But that board has the entire pin out, so I know where I'm soldering my wires to. So your red is your 5 volt, and if you're giving more voltage, that's okay because 99% of cameras these days can handle more voltage, but be sure to check so you don't burn up your camera. For your camera, if you can remember to solder up your power, ground, and video, you'll be good. Now, for the Crossfire, as always, it does come with heat shrink. It's always a little bit extra long. Everybody knows that. And then I trim it up so that way it fits nicely. After I've done so, and you'll also see that I've faced my antenna in the same downward motion as my wires. And the only reason why is because the wire's just simply too long. Now, I do like on the Source 1, there's quite a few openings in the back. There's even a place to mount another 30 by 30 if that's what I had or if that's what was going for me. But in this situation, it's not. So I just used the zip tie. I locked it down nice and tight. And as you can see, it looks really good. Now, the next step on our roster is going to be to solder up our VTX. Before I do that, I like to go ahead and get it connected. And by doing that, I can go ahead, set up smart audio, unlock it, and get it on the channel that I want to have it on, all before I stuff it in the quad and then don't have access to the button that comes with it. So I've got a bench power supply. I'm going to connect it, and then I'm going to roll through the different settings and channels and all that kind of stuff, and I'm going to set it how I like it. I like all my quads to be on R1, and I like them to be at max power, unless I'm headed for a race. So I'm going to set that up on this one now. Now that our VTX is all set up, I'm going to go ahead and work on my receiver's antenna. And for me, I'm not really a fan of the Immortal Tee. It seems like no matter which way I mount it or however I run it, it's always getting chewed up by the props. So I tend to favor this antenna that comes with the Crossfire receiver. It's the Crossfire Nano, and this receiver has been referred to before as the Immortal L, just because when you mount it, it's in an L shape versus the T, which is the Immortal Tee. Plus, I save like $5 or $6 by doing it this way, which really it's not about the money, but when I mount the Immortal L, I crash after crash after crash, and my antenna's there. It's fine. It's not chewed up. So it's just been my experience with it. So if you're having trouble with your Immortal Tees, 1, I've got a video on it. I'll link that down in the video description. And 2, try the Immortal L. I think you'll be impressed. So I've used the antenna straw just like any other, or what's also known as a forever tube if you get it from certain websites. And what I do is I heat it up with the gun, not too fast. I just warm it up and move it around like you've witnessed here. until I get it into the perfect L shape. And then once I'm there, I'm ready for the next step. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because a lot of guys are running the Immortal Tee. So what I do is I lay the L against it, I measure my lengths, and then I trim it. After I've done that, I cut a nice little hole in the back, and then what I do is I feed the antenna both sides of the L. I feed them right through the forever tube or right through the antenna tube, and after I've done that, I secure it to the frame using two different methods. One is going to be heat shrink, and second is going to be zip ties. And whenever I do that, I never have a problem. This one is a little bit different because I had to cut and make space for this purple thing that I have here. I don't have an actual name for it. I did find it on Thingiverse. I will link it down in the video description. I did it more or less for cosmetics. It said something about protecting the VTX. So hey, I went with it. The next thing up is to go ahead and tin our pads so that we can solder up our Crossfire. Because without that, how's it going to fly? So for our Crossfire, we need a full UART, and then we need to provide 5 volts and a ground. So as you see here, I've chose UART 2, and that's an RX and a TX. It's important that you know when you're coming from your Crossfire, your RX is going to TX and your TX is going to your RX. I know that sounds confusing, but it's actually very simple, and the reason why is because one is transmitting and one is receiving. You can find a full video on this that I have. I'll put it down in the video description. Now, I didn't show it in this video, but I did go ahead and power up my Crossfire, and I bound it to my Tyrannus before I put heat shrink on and made it hard to get to. And that's something very useful. I think that you guys should do it too, especially if you have an FR Sky, because once you do that, then you can't get to the bind button. So it definitely makes life easy to do that. So I tinned the wires, and then I soldered the wires. I wanted to show you how these side skirts are kind of like a squishy. And I don't know, I kind of like the way they look from the side angle. Now let's go ahead and get our VTX ready. We need to go ahead and tin all of our pads. I have used the 9-volt regulated pad for my VTX. It does demand 7 volts or more. So by choosing a pad that's giving 9 volts and it's regulated with its own regulator straight from the flight controller, I know that I'm going to get the cleanest possible feed to my VTX, which makes for clean video. Now, just like the rest of the components in the build, I went ahead and stripped the wires, then I tinned them, and then I soldered them up. I accidentally soldered, or I should say tinned, an extra pad. No worries there. I'm not going to use it. No harm, no foul. Okay, pilots, so with everything soldered up, everything wired, everything is looking and working good. I did a little test run. Now it's time to install our mounting board. This is the same board that was a twofer that we used as our pinout. I'm going to go ahead and put it on, and I'm going to use it to mount my VTX. This VTX is a very powerful VTX. It gets hot very fast. It also demands a lot of cooling and has a built-in heat sink. But I'm going to use some double-sided sticky tape, and I'm going to go ahead and stick it right to the top of the mounting board and then lock down my nylon nuts. Be sure to use nylon nuts anytime you're tightening down something close to any components, connections, or wires. Although I think I'm going to get great performance out of this VTX, there is not much space to work with. This is a very big VTX, so be sure that you're putting it in a very roomy, spacey build. Now, my video wire coming out of the back of the VTX with the MMCX connector is actually touching right on top of my capacitor. So I threw some extra heat shrink on it just to give it more of a barrier, and then I'm going to wrap electrical tape around the brass portion of my antenna and my SMA connector. This is going to avoid any contact or any conductivity between anything. There's no point to take any chances, especially seeing that this part of the antenna is going to be underneath the build and hidden. Nobody's going to see it, so what does it care what it looks like? After I've done that, I'm going to take extra time and care to make sure I use as many zip ties as I can. I've seen guys use that wrap strap, and you can get that online fairly cheap. That stuff works good too. I find it harder to work with, but it does last longer. I have zero problems using zip ties. I absolutely love them. I use them on everything. Also, I can do them in cool colors and match them to my build. So as you can see here, I got away with 2 of them. So I'm strapping one towards the center, but right by the brass, and I'm putting the second one closer towards the antenna portion, and it'll kind of pull it up and give me that 45-degree angle that I'm looking for. Because when my quad is flying, it's not flying level, it's actually flying at an angle, which means that my antenna is going to be spread out in a circular condition, doing a great job spreading and picking up video signals. Now with that last piece of the puzzle finished and completed, it's time to put on my top plate. I'm going to put all the screws in my top plate, and then I'm going to figure out some sort of battery grip. Whether it's Umagod or just the standard rubber that it came with, that's what I'm going to use to hold my battery down. I always like to use 2 straps, so that's what I'm going to use here. Also, my 4 front screws are going to be for my GoPro. I printed my own GoPro. I found one on Thingiverse. You're welcome to do that too if you have a 3D printer. If you don't, you can order one online. So now with our build together and everything is working and looking great, we're going to go ahead and connect to Betaflight and get everything ready. I'm going to leave that for a second video. In this video, I want to go ahead and show you guys how it looks and how it came out. And then I'm definitely going to include a flight run because I know you guys want to see that. Make sure you hang around to watch the flight footage and see how this flies, especially to check out this rare KV of 1739. I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on the next one. Alright pilots, you guys are strapped to the quad right now. I have not touched the PIDs, haven't done any PID tuning, haven't touched anything. I just strapped you to the quad, set a prop, set up my rates. Let's go for a spin.
You can name. No, he won't take any blame. So I'm sorry for not slipping in, but don't worry, we'll find our way in. So I'm sorry for not slipping in, not slipping in, not slipping in. Let me see the water side. Let me slip into the water. Go down until I drown. So I'm sorry for not slipping in, but don't worry, we'll find our way in. So I'm sorry for not slipping in, not slipping in, not slipping in. Until I drown. So I'm sorry for not slipping in, but don't worry, we'll find our way in. So I'm sorry for not slipping in, not slipping in, not slipping in.